Hey, friends, welcome to the Living Truth Podcast. This is your host, Michael Carey, and I have Matthew Raabsmith. Matthew is a author and a coach and a speaker, and I'm sure that there are many other things that I can say. But what am I missing? Can you fill in the blank and tell us a little bit about your book and your coaching practice? That'd be a great place to start.
Yeah. I mean, I probably would be remiss if I don't mention I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a recovering addict. I've written a book, or at least I got to co-author a book, so I can't take all the credit for it. I had other people helping me get across the finish line. But ultimately, I think my passion is helping men, helping couples to find healing, in the process of recovering from betrayal, infidelity, addiction. And this is something that I went through in my own life, and it really became somewhat begrudgingly at first what I ended up doing professionally. It was not necessarily the path I wanted to walk down, but I think God was really gracious and patient, but also very clear about this is the work you're going to do. And I really love that I get to do it. I get to see a lot of fun success stories, and that's been really good.
Yeah, amen. Yeah, I like that. Husband, father, and all that. And ditto. Yeah, if you'd have told me 20 years ago
Mhm.
I would be doing this, I would have said you probably have a better chance of me moving to Mars with all of my family with me, and everyone
Yep.
that I know.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
But God has plans, and it's definitely rewarding to see
Yes.
those to see the result, to see people and their lives change, and guys really showing up, becoming the men, the
Hmm.
father, the husband that they never were. It is beautiful.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Matthew, I know you've been on our podcast before, but I think it's with your wife, but the both of you
Hmm.
together. So
Yeah.
this is a treat. I'm really glad that we get a chance to talk and hang out a little bit and get to know each
Absolutely.
other. And yeah, just before I clicked record, we were talking. When we were emailing back and forth, and you mentioned the topic of resentment, I was like, this is
Hmm.
a topic that is not explored deep enough. We talk so much about family of origin, about all the different places, and what about fleshing out what really takes place today, the reality of what we experience and go through,
Yeah.
and how that can build up. It
Hmm.
can be huge in the moment, or it can build and build and get to a
Yeah.
place where it's eating us up, and we're just ready to go back to acting out again. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's I remember. Well, I don't exactly. I think it's somewhere in the big book of AA where it talks about resentment being the number one catalyst to relapse and all that.
It
Something
is.
along
Yeah.
that line. It's been
Yeah,
years
it
since I've
is.
read it,
And
but
it does, and I think the reason it was important for me to want to talk about this is because of my experience working with a lot of husbands who are trying really, really hard to make good progress, who are wanting to see a different experience in their life and in their relationships, but struggling and seeing in them this kind of growing resentment, this growing frustration, annoyance, this build that often will turn into something really nasty, which could be as far as relapse, or it could be really kind of resetting the whole picture for them and restarting the whole process. And it's often born in some of these resentments that we're not aware of, and we're often not aware of how they come about, right? They kind of catch us late, where we realize, wow, I've really crossed some lines, or I've gone to places that I didn't want to go. I didn't even know I had the fuel for that kind of fire anymore. And so I do think it's a really important topic, and I think it happens a lot more than we've been comfortable talking about. And so I think it's good to have that conversation.
mm-hmm, exactly right. Yes, and as you were talking, I was just thinking about all the different context and where we could take it. There may be specifics that we can get into some and scenarios and stuff, but so naming it, where does it come from? The framework, what to do about it, some of the things we were talking about, and places to go, and
Mhm.
maybe specifics of, yeah, some things, some realities that guys experience in recovery. And one of them I could think of right away that I know is kind of a sensitive place to go is I see guys that feel frustrated and resentful when they put a timeline on their wife's healing and different things
Hmm.
like that. And it's like, it's, it is a sensitive thing. And just to try to say suck it up is not really helpful. But the reality
Hmm.
of it, it's a feeling, you know.
Yeah.
First of all, it seems to me like it's a feeling, and so if they're there wherever they are in their journey, their program, their path to healing, that's where they are. So help
Hmm.
them deal with that in a productive way and
Yeah.
reduce that so it gets better and better. But yeah, that's something that just came to mind that I know I don't mind diving into sensitive things like that. And yeah, the reality is you can't put a timeline on your wife's healing, um, but there's still that annoying thing that I see guys working through, trying to anyway, or what do they do about that anyway? One of the possibilities of things that I think would be helpful. So,
Yeah.
yeah, what do you think? Some specifics of where does it come from and the framework of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you named one of the big core components. I find that resentment is often it is relationally driven and kind of born. Often our resentments are with another person or within a relationship. And so it's not that I can't have resentments kind of in isolation and in myself, but it's just it's much harder. Resentments are typically they're born out of this pattern that I see often people getting into, and it's a pattern that many of us have not noticed about ourselves. But I see a kind of commonality in the guys that I work with. I see it in my experience, and it actually starts with shame. A lot of people don't recognize that resentment obviously usually starts with shame, almost always around something I've done, right? And so when it's become known that I have done something that's outside of my character or outside of my values, it's not who I want to be, it's something that pushes people away or causes them to look at me differently. I then get into the practice of shame, right? Shame is really about this kind of self-loathing, it's about this negative self-perspective. And that pattern of shame, shame is usually in development used as a behavioral correction, right? We shame a child, right? We tell a child shame on you because what we want them to do is we want them to change their behavior. And so that's what many of us use as adults. We use shame to correct our behavior. And so when I've done something like betray my wife, right? Or I've acted out with pornography, or I've done something that I think is wrong, I will shame myself, right? I'll kind of pour negativity on myself in hopes that it will correct my behavior. And it usually does, right? It'll motivate me to get going, but it motivates me by kind of negatively attacking my sense of self. Right? It motivates me by thinking I'm a horrible person, and so I don't want to be a horrible person. I want to feel like a good person. And so I need to do the right thing to kind of feel better. And so that's really what starts this whole process is this kind of sense of shame. And what I see is that with many guys, they'll shame themselves and then they'll get into what we call performance behaviors. Right. So I beat myself up. I tell myself how bad I am. I motivate myself to change that way. And then I start trying to do all the right things, right? And whatever those right things are, if the right thing is going to a meeting and a 12-step program, or the right thing is I'm going to do a full disclosure, or I'm going to do a polygraph, I'm going to do all these recovery pieces. And it's not that any of those are wrong, but I'm doing them to try to fix the shame. And that's where things start to kind of go off the rails is that I'm using all these good things, these good recovery initiatives that we know work, but I'm doing them to try to address the shame. I'm using them as kind of these performance-based behaviors. One of my performance-based behaviors is actually housework. I will when I'm feeling bad about myself, I'll clean because there's something about cleaning up the house, right? When the house is organized and everything's like clean and put away, there's a sense of accomplishment. And it's usually something I can do in a short amount of time, right? So when I look at our sink and there's dishes everywhere, I think that's 45 minutes. I've got this, right? And that's what I actually used to do in our relationship with Joanna. I would feel bad about acting out. I wouldn't tell her. She wouldn't know that I was acting out at the time, but I would feel bad. I'd beat myself up and then I'd start to clean. and I would clean the house, right? And she'd be out at class or at work, and she'd come home, and all of this performance, right, was designed to try to make me feel better about myself. And here's where the resentment would kick in, is that what I'd want applause, right, for my performance, right? Every performance wants recognition from the audience. And so I would perform, I'd clean the house, and she'd come home and she'd be like, "How was your day?" I was like, "Great. Did you notice anything?" And I really would. I would sit back and I would kind of point out the kitchen. Did you notice anything, how the house looks? And she'd be like, "It looks fine." Right. And if I didn't get the kind of applause I was looking for, right? If I didn't get the kind of recognition that re-instilled my kind of upper, like my higher sense of self, that's where I would start to build a resentment. Right. And I would start to go, you know what? She doesn't appreciate me, right? She doesn't see the work that I'm doing. And what I didn't realize was is I was trapping myself and I was trapping her into this kind of built-in negotiation. She didn't even know it was happening, right? I wasn't cleaning because I felt like it was the right thing to do. I was cleaning because I wanted to feel better about myself. I wanted her to acknowledge it. And if she didn't acknowledge it, I was going to use that as fuel, right? To kind of build those resentments, build those angers, right? And resentment is definitely one of those things that starts small, right? It'd be the like it rarely explodes right away. It's something that I would just kind of remember. I'd be like, well, she didn't say much about the work that I did today, right? And I would kind of hold on to that as kind of a wound. And that over time, right? That pattern of beating myself up, performing, trying to do the right thing, be the good guy, right? Not getting the praise that I felt like I was due, and then kind of holding on to that anger. That's what I really work with guys and seeing is that kind of resentment building cycle. That's what's usually building that resentment. It's when we think we're doing the right thing and we're not getting the recognition for it. That's when I really begin to get those kind of resentments building, and that's where they're going to build up to the point that they're going to explode.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that scenario is so true for so many of us.
Mhm.
So in the context of marriage, but you could think that through when it comes to the workplace, your
Yep.
job,
Yep.
um, your sports team you're on, whatever softball team,
Mhm.
and on and on and on. Wherever it is, if I don't get the recognition, and then there's that also. I think a piece of it too could be the sense of failure. If I'm
Mhm.
failing at something, so the shame, things that are triggering the shame cycle back into the resentment. And
Yeah.
then if you're upset and angry with your wife, that is certainly going to be a trigger to go back to acting out. And then
Hmm.
then you have to go clean the car next, right? I mean, there's whatever the next thing is, you're just
Yeah.
wrapped up in that cycle going around and around in circles.
Right. And what I find is that, even if I'll do the right thing, she may have had a trigger that day, right? One of the things I found that happened in Joanna's recovery is I would have like something in my recovery that I would do that I'd be proud of, I'd want to talk about. And she would have a trigger that day, right? Something that reminded her of how easy it was for me to betray her, or how easy it was for me to lie to her, would kind of flood her during the day. So here we are sitting at our check-in, and I'm excited to share this insight that I had or this victory that I've just had. And she's excited to, not excited, but right, she's feeling the need to share her pain, right? And so that would then also do that kind of same thing. I would want to talk about this good thing that I did. She would want to talk about the pain. And it wasn't that she didn't care about that, but right, that pain for her was front and center. And I would often interpret that as you're not seeing me, you're not recognizing the work I'm doing, right? You're not giving me credit for what I did. And that's really doing the right thing, but having expectations of others attached to it. That's when we know it's going to be a resentment builder. That when the right thing is attached to expectations of others and their approval, that's when, even if it's the right thing, it's going to produce some long-term problems for me and for the relationship. And like I said, not because my spouse doesn't care, but because they have other things going on in their life too, right? They have other realities that they're facing. And like you said, and this can happen anywhere. This happens often at work. I see a lot of people who will overwork sometimes. They'll put in extra hours. They will pass, they will kind of do whatever it takes to make work a success. And if they don't get recognized for it, if they don't get the promotion or they don't get the raise or their boss doesn't praise them, the kind of same thing happens, right? They have this expectation and this negativity that begins to build. And then what will often happen is they'll think it's their fault, right? That shame will want to tell me that this is my fault, right? That's what would happen with me. Joanna would want to talk about her pain. I'd go into that shame stance again. So, oh, this was my fault. I did this horrible thing. She feels so bad about her day. And then the process starts right all over, right? And I go back and we do that enough times, really not even noticing it, that when the bubble bursts, it's usually it's a big bubble. One of the signs of resentment for me is rage. When I feel like I go from 0 to 100, that lets me know that I've been packing stuff away. Um, because when my body wants to kind of explode in anger and I can feel my heart racing, I think it's just, I used to think it was just the moment, right? Maybe it was something Joanna said or it was something about the situation. But I've now learned that rage is really just these resentments that have been building and building and building. We used to call it when I grew up gunny sacking, right? I just put it in the sack, I'm holding on to it until somebody did something bad enough, and then I just open it all up and I go, let me tell you, right? And I know it because Joanna and I would have these conversations and I'd start to bring stuff up from months ago. I'd be like, you didn't do this and you did and she'd be like, you've never told me about these things, right? You've never talked about that. Why is this coming up now? This is all news to me. And I've learned that these are the signs, right, of that kind of resentment, that kind of stuffing game.
When you keep the record of all the things, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so what you mentioned, just to back up for a second, I wanted to
Yeah.
highlight the idea of not being seen and heard
Mm-hmm.
and not being acknowledged for doing something. Those aren't really inherently wrong or bad things necessarily, but the
Yeah.
key word you just mentioned right after that was expectation, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
expectations. So when they turn into demands,
Mm-hmm.
expectations are little demands and demands are resentments waiting to happen. It's like
Yeah.
just that cycle kind of builds through that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so I have a desire to be seen and heard. I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
human thing. Everyone does.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But that when we you're excited about something, your wife needs to process something else. In that moment, what you described is then you're dealing with your shame and feeling unseen, unheard.
Mm-hmm.
That is a recipe for shame, spiraling, and
Yeah.
more resentment, right?
Yeah.
And something interesting I wonder, I was wondering about too while you were talking, is do you think that resentment really kind of covers up shame, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because we want to turn it away from ourselves. When we feel
Yeah.
so much shame, it's we're feeling that shame about something that we did, something we believe we are or aren't, or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and resentment turns it the focus on someone else. So it's kind of deflecting, isn't it? So it can
Yeah.
actually cover up the shame, right?
It does because they're both blame tactics. It's just who am I blaming, right? Shame is I'm blaming myself. I'm the problem, right? I'm the defective one. I'm the broken one. And that was how I would often feel in our relationship. Joanna didn't bring in sexual addiction. She didn't bring in this broken past, right? She brought in just this perfect person that she was. And so I would then, right, shame myself. Okay, I'm the problem, but you can only do that for so long, right? And so you want to get out of that. You want to stop blaming yourself because that feels horrible, right? Because to blame yourself just reinforces that I'm a monster and people don't like to feel that way. So one of the easy tactics is to shift, right? And to go, I know the problem. It's not me, it's her. And the reality is that blame is not going to help you whatsoever, right? I think this is one of the places that people get so stuck in their recovery is they look for someone to blame. And even some of our best recovery initiatives, I think fall into this trap. We talk a lot about like family of origin, and I do think it's really important to understand our story. It's important to understand our experiences, but this can often kind of degrade into blame, resentments towards our parents or towards our middle school colleagues who were mean to us, right? And all we're doing is we're just trying to move that blame around, right? I don't want to blame myself, so I'm going to blame them. Instead of recognizing blaming anybody will keep me stuck in that feeling of unheard, unseen, unloved, unwanted, defective. Like all those things are going to do is keep me stuck in those feelings, keep me activated in this kind of expectation driven living, these kind of demand driven living, rather than the freedom of what we call individuation, right? This idea that I can in myself see what I'm doing. I can recognize that. I can look to God and see the way that God recognizes and sees me. I don't have to put those demands on other people. I don't have to shame myself either. I can live kind of independent of both those things.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Yeah. That's awesome. And yeah, when you were talking about blame, and that's blame isn't helpful. One of the things that came to mind, I see we went through, I don't know how long, I'm going to say it was many years of this phase my wife and I went through. And I think it happens too a lot with just couples in recovery where we start to diagnose one another, you know? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's 5% from today. You're really feeling this from your past. And in that moment, that is not helpful at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? I don't know if that
Yeah.
happens, if that has ever happened in
Oh,
your
yeah.
house or not, but
Oh yeah. Yeah, I know. Sometimes the knowledge of recovery can be a nasty poison to relationships. I've had multiple moments where I've wanted to explain to my wife exactly what she's doing. Working professionally, this can get really dangerous too, right? Because I can be like, "Well, I know exactly what you're doing. I know how exactly wrong it is." And the whole time completely oblivious to how awful, right, I'm being. And so it is. And I think it is that wanting to get out of that shame, right? Wanting to not feel like the bad guy. Um, because that is one way that relationships deal with conflict. They'll want to find the bad guy, right? If we can find out who's responsible, who's the bad guy, it gives us a sense of short-term relief. And so that's what we do. We usually grew up in families that did that. Families often have a black sheep. They have somebody in the family they blame for their problems. And so most of us have been trained to do this. It's really about seeing it. It's about recognizing, oh, we're doing this thing. We're diagnosing each other. We're trying to find the bad guy. And even this is the problem, I think, for recovery couples. If the bad guy is the betrayer, there's still no future there, right? If the story of your relationship is there is a good spouse and a bad spouse, there is not a future in that story. That is not a redeemed, unified story. And I think that it's a trap that many of us fall into. And I think it's one thing to have remorse and contrition and to say, I know what I did and I know what I did was wrong and it's not who I want to be. But for then me to take on the role of the bad one in the marriage, even if I think that will help my wife to feel better, because I think a lot of husbands do this thinking, okay, if I acknowledge that I'm the bad guy, then she will feel better and we will make progress. And we think that's what's going to work. And it will in terms of a little bit, right? Because it'll probably communicate to her a sense of like he's taking responsibility, he gets it. But I can't stay in that space for very long, right? If I stay in that space of I'm the bad guy, she's the good one in the relationship, and I'm just lucky to be here, eventually my soul is going to go, not interested, right? I'm not interested in being in a relationship where I'm the bad guy. But vice versa, you're not going to work if she's the bad one either, right? And so I've seen guys who've been in recovery a long time and haven't made progress. They'll just flip the script and say, well, she won't get over it, right? She's not getting over it. She's not moving on. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing. And some of those things could be true, right? They could point to specific things that say that, but I will explain to them. if she's the bad guy, we just have a different problem, but we're going to be stuck in the same kind of spiral. And so breaking that down and going, no, that's not a future for us. The
Mhm.
future has to be recognizing the qualities, the good that we both bring to this relationship, the good that we both are. And then what does our story look like from that, even knowing the reality of betrayal?
Mhm.
And I think that's, but it's hard because, like I said, I think many of us have been trained to kind of find the bad guy and move on, right? Find the
Mhm.
problem and move on.
Yeah, I think that scenario where the betrayer is taking on that shame and the responsibility, um, certainly in the beginning, that's necessary. But
Hmm.
sometimes I think it could be, it probably can move into just trying to pacify things to make the
Hmm.
argument end, to
Yeah.
come to a flat ground, flat, level emotions rather than
Hmm.
stay in this space where things are painful, trying to
Yeah.
move past the pain because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
All the things that we do to avoid, they just, how
Mm.
deep the rabbit hole goes
Yeah. Very
with
much.
that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that does kind of move a little bit into what I mentioned before was when the betrayer is feeling resentment. That scenario you just
Hmm.
mentioned, where my wife, if only she would get past this, if only, and it is exactly what you said, blaming.
Hmm.
I do want to say that I don't think that's something that a couple can really work through themselves. I really think they need
Yeah.
an outside person, a third person, trusted party that's neutral, who can, a counselor, coach who can really help them
Yeah.
point out, neither of you are the bad guy. And, this is down the road. If there are
Hmm.
couples, betrayed spouse, people that are listening that are in the beginning stages, yeah, it's down the road. But down the road, being in that position where you can work that out, where we're not finding the bad guy anymore, or it's happening less and less, and
Yeah.
bringing truth to the story,
Yeah.
the truth. So yeah, it's definitely there. But the resentment, you mentioned one. I'd love to explore that for a minute and see if you can name some of the other signs that I'm feeling resentment. You mentioned rage. I think they were kind of salt and peppered throughout some of the ideas,
Hmm.
but can you name that? Like, well, how do I diagnose and understand what I'm feeling is resentment?
Yeah, I think rage is one of them. One of the signs I see is hopelessness when someone's hopeless, or they'll sometimes describe it as feeling powerless. That's usually a sign that there's some resentment that's built up because what they're experiencing is they're experiencing everything I'm trying is not working, right? So I've got this expected outcome. I think I'm doing the right thing. It's not working. That's usually where our hopelessness comes from. And so, or our sense of powerless. And so I work with a lot of guys who, when they come to me, they've been in recovery a long time. They've maybe had some personal progress, but they don't feel like their relationship has matched the same kind of trajectory or progress, and they can often feel really hopeless. They can even kind of describe what we would talk about as depression. They're kind of unmotivated. They're not really feeling like it's worth it because, like I said, their experience that they're having is I'm doing the right things, I'm not getting the right outcomes. Therefore, why should I keep doing it? And so, rage can be one of the responses, this kind of injustice, this anger. Depression or kind of like hopelessness can be the other. Um, Sometimes it'll be this kind of playing the victim. This is poor me, whining. It's one of those things that we all do, but no one enjoys it when someone else is doing it, right? But we all fall in the trap of whining about something and,
Pouting, yeah. Hmm.
pouting, whining, complaining. These are signs of that resentment as well. It's signs that I have a experience of an injustice. And that's really what is underlying that sense of resentment, is that I have an experience of an injustice that's being unresolved. And I don't think I have a way to resolve it, so I just kind of hold on to it. And and what we know in terms of the research is injustice is not something that the human soul lets go of easily. We very rarely move on from a sense of injustice. This is one of the reasons that betrayed partners have a hard time moving on is because they've had a true experience of injustice where, hey, wait, I've put into this relationship, but my partner wasn't, but they would told me they were, right? That's not right. That's unjust. That's a really hard thing to just kind of say, okay, I'll move on from that. And so when I feel like I'm having an unjust experience, right? My experience was I'm going to clean the kitchen, and justice will be that my wife will appreciate it and acknowledge it, right? That's what I would consider justice, fairness. And when I don't have that experience, my brain goes, oh, that's wrong, right? You poor thing. And so I hold on to that. And even if that's not right, right? Even if that's not real, my brain doesn't care. It just takes what it senses as injustice and holds on to that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what's driving it. So those are kind of some of those signs. Like I said, rage, some depression or hopelessness, kind of playing the victim, whining, complaining. Those are going to be the things that tell you all is not right kind of under the surface. Even if I'm generally happy, right? And I work with clients who are generally happy. They're often successful, sometimes very successful at work or very have lots of friends. They're maybe really connected with their men's group, like they have great relationships in their recovery community, but there is something not right underneath the surface for them in one particular relationship, usually the marriage relationship, where that resentment's really kind of taking root.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that could easily be projected onto any relationship anywhere too.
Hmm.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah, can we move into some things to do about it? One one thing I was just thinking too in that scenario of wanting to be appreciated, seen, heard. Um, so your wife was you were kind of searching, fishing, I like to say, for that acknowledgement, for that approval, and all of that. And if we have to point blank ask for it, it doesn't seem like it's genuine, right?
Oh
It's like
yeah.
I shouldn't have to ask; she should just recognize it.
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
doesn't usually work, especially in certain circumstances, like you just mentioned, when your wife has something completely else, other outside on her mind that has nothing to do with the house and the cleaning and anything. She's frustrated with something. She's definitely not going to notice it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, in that situation, how do you process that? What do you do?
Yeah, I always like to say if I have to ask for it, it's like fake sugar. I mean, it will be sweet, but it's just not the same, right? It's no one who's had fake sugar will tell you it's as good as real sugar. And I have to ask you to see me. It's not the same. So I think one of the things is we do have to start at the beginning. This is kind of a domino effect as I was talking about, right? This shame is really what triggers everything that comes from it. And so if I'm not addressing my core identity for myself, I will be constantly seeking my identity through my actions. Right? I like to say that performance-based identity is like having no identity at all. If I only see myself as good by the good things that I do and the people who recognize them in me, that is just a hamster wheel of death. And it's a hamster wheel that many of us were on. In the kind of bulk of my acting out years, I was a pastor. I was a youth and family pastor. And I was living this double life. I was doing all of these things that I thought were good, that I thought God would approve of. I was serving in the church. We were taking mission trips. I was helping people come to Christ. I was discipling, right? I was doing all of these things trying to win back my sense of self that I was losing to the pornography and the acting out. And I couldn't keep up. There was no way to keep up. I was constantly chasing, kind of wanting to overcome my sin. And I was very aware that I didn't have to do that for my salvation, right? I knew that, hey, I'm good. God saved me. He's given his life for me. But the idea that I was good in his eyes, right? That I was worthy in his eyes or valuable or lovable in his eyes, I couldn't believe based on what I was doing. And so what I recognized was it won't matter what it is, but if I am constantly chasing this sense of self, I'll chase it in anything. And I could see that I even started doing that in my recovery work early on. I wanted to be the good recovery guy, right? When things hit the fan, right? When Joanna found out of everything, I mean, the first thing I wanted to do was to do recovery right. I'm gonna go to the right intensive, and I'm gonna go to the group every week, and I'm gonna do the check-in, and I'm gonna get my chips. I mean, I used to come home with my, my sobriety chips and be like, "Hey, look, aren't you proud of me?" And I could see that it was still that journey to try to address my sense of self. And what I found was I was just going to be running that race, and I was just going to wear myself out. And so I had some really good counselors, some really good coaches, some really good mentors who called me to slow down and say, "How do you feel about yourself regardless? If
Hmm.
you don't if you don't get sober, how will you feel about who you are as a person?" Right? Can you find that guy lovable? Not the guy that cleans up the house, but the
Hmm.
guy who wastes an hour, right? Can you find that guy lovable?
Hmm.
Is he as worthy as the guy who's 12 years sober? Because if he's not, you'll be chasing that version of yourself your whole life. And so a lot of this starts at the beginning and recognizing that what the shame is trying to do is it's trying to kill my sense of self. And so the only way out of resentment is to build my sense of self without trying to earn it, with just being able to see it. And part of that comes in seeing it in my brokenness, seeing it and being willing to confess. I love the practice of confession because I feel like it sets people up to find themselves lovable in their imperfection. If I can't confess and find myself lovable, then I'm kind of on a train to resentment and to expectations. If I can confess my brokenness, if I confess my mistakes, if I can name where I'm struggling and still like me, that's usually a really, really good sign. And so confession and seeing myself well is the place everything has to start. I think the other thing, if once I've done that, then I can do the same thing for others, which is, can I see others in kind of who they are? Can I see them lovable? Can I even reframe? One of the things we do in resentment is we play the victim, we make our wife often the bad guy. Well, it won't work for me to make me the bad guy, but can I make my view of her really high? Can I actually raise my view of my spouse? Can I see the things that they're doing as signs of their just incredible createdness of God, right? The image of God in them. And so, what people think is like pride is that we see ourselves too high. I don't think that's it. It's that we see ourselves above others, or we see ourselves not needing anything, right? Pride is about going, I see myself, right? Or healthy understanding is that I see myself well, and humility is being able to go, but I am surrounded by a bunch of brilliant, wonderful people. And if I can see myself highly, if I can see other people's highly, it's really hard to get resentful. It's really hard to be angry at myself or angry at others if I have a high view of them. If I have a low view of myself and a low view of other people, resentment's around the corner.
Hmm. Yes. Well, yeah, you nailed and that approach, the core identity is
Mm.
so important. Do
Yeah.
you think something like practical tools, like maybe journaling, writing out this is what happened, this is what I feel about it. Hey, look, write it out. Write out something like,
Yeah.
you know what, I'm still okay, even if I don't get that approval. Like, I'm a child
Hmm.
of God. I am, and naming some of those things that we learn about ourselves, about that core identity, not from a sense of building ourselves up and making something that we're not, trying to be prideful, but just to get
Yeah.
out of that demanding
Yeah.
for that approval, right?
Yeah. No, I love journaling. I also love taking in the moments and being able to recognize in the moment when I may be falling into that trap. And so to this day, I still fall into the trap the belief that I'm defective and the belief that I'm not loved by my wife. And so when I'm in those moments, what I've learned to do is just name them right in the moment and be like, I'll even right in front of her say, I know right now I am believing the lie that I'm defective, and I'm believing the lie that you don't love me. And I'm treating you out of that framework, and I'm treating myself out of that belief, right? I'm beating myself up, and I'm building resentments towards you. And I'll usually then go right into what the truth is, right? Because it's that feeling is real. That feeling of defective, the feeling of loved is real. It's a real experience that I'm having, but that doesn't make it true. And I think that's something that really important. Emotions can be real, but not true. Because the truth is, I'm I am wonderfully made, right? I am God's masterpiece. And my wife has demonstrated love upon love upon love for me over the course of our life together. That's
Mhm.
true. That's the real thing. Even if I just made a mistake, those things are true. Even if my wife is currently frustrated at me, those things are still true. None of that changes. And when I remind myself of that in the moment, everything gets easier. I'm way more patient. I'm way more connected.
Hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, I thinking through our conversation could probably dive deeper into about 12 things that you were talking about, and but we're gonna wrap it up here for today. And
Yeah.
it was so awesome to be able to talk to you. I think you have a network of coaches and some resources in that for
Yeah.
couples that are needing help together as in the coupleship and that sort of thing. Yeah, do you want to mention your website or something along that line for a resource?
Yeah, like I said, we specialize in couples. Really, we love that relational journey of recovery, and so we have really found a sweet spot in working with couples. We have a couples group program that we love. We're putting together a couples retreat at the end of this year. And if somebody's looking for that kind of support, rabsmith.com. We're the only Rabsmiths in the whole world, so that makes it really easy to find. And you can kind of go there, find out about some of the different things we offer, the ways we support. And so, yeah, I would love for folks to come and hang out with us.
Definitely, definitely promote that the coaching and that couples retreat out in Colorado at the end of the year. It's going to
Yeah,
be
it's gonna be
awesome.
fun.
So
It's gonna be really fun.
beautiful. Thanks so much, Matthew. Really appreciate you being on the podcast here.
Thanks, Michael. Really enjoyed it.